She stood in the town square holding a basket of mending, and every man looked away. Josephine Hart had been a widow for 3 years. She was 34 years old, strong-shouldered from farm work, with dark hair always pulled back tight, and eyes that had learned not to expect kindness. The women of Cutter's Bend whispered that she was too proud. The men whispered worse, that her husband's death had been her fault somehow, that she carried bad luck like a disease. Nobody would marry a woman like that. But 6 months from now, she would stand in that same square wearing a ring she never thought she'd see, holding the hand of a man who had knelt in the mud to ask for it. And the whole town would remember the day they turned their backs on her. It started on a Tuesday morning in April 1883, when the rains came hard. Josephine had walked into town to deliver mending shirts, torn trousers, a wedding dress she'd altered for the banker's daughter. She earned her living with a needle now. Her husband Samuel had left her the cabin and 20 acres, but no money and no help. She sewed until her fingers bled, took in washing, kept chickens, and survived. The general store stood at the center of town. She entered quietly, setting the basket on the counter. Mr. Calloway, the shopkeeper, barely glanced at her. "Mrs. Hart," he said flatly. "The mending?" "Yes, sir. All finished." He inspected each piece with exaggerated care, as if expecting her work to be faulty. It never was. Finally, he counted out coins, less than they'd agreed on. "That's not the full amount," Josephine said steadily. "Take it or leave it." She needed the money for flour and lamp oil. She took it. Outside, the rain had worsened. She pulled her shawl tighter and started toward home. The road turned to thick mud that sucked at her boots. Halfway across the square, she slipped and fell hard, landing on her hands and knees in the mire. Her basket tumbled. Coins scattered into puddles. She scrambled after them, mud coating her dress, her hands, her face. People passed by. A woman pulled her children away as if poverty were contagious. A man left. Josephine gathered what coins she could find, throat burning with shame. Then a shadow fell across her. A man crouched down in the mud beside her. Not standing over her. Beside her. "Let me help," he said quietly. His voice was low and rough, like gravel smoothed by rain. She looked up. He was tall, even crouched down, broad through the shoulders, wearing a worn coat and hat darkened by water. His face was weathered, maybe 40, with gray threading through his brown beard. But his eyes were steady and kind. He picked up 2 coins from the mud and placed them gently in her palm. "Thank you," she whispered. He found another, then another. When they were all gathered, he stood and offered his hand. She hesitated. In 3 years, no man had offered her anything but judgment. "I won't bite," he said with the smallest smile. She placed her muddy hand in his. He pulled her to her feet with easy strength, steadying her when she swayed. "You all right, ma'am?" "Yes. Thank you." He tipped his hat. "Name's Caleb Marsh. I'm new to Cutter's Bend." Josephine Hart. Something shifted in his expression when he heard the name. She waited for him to make an excuse and walk away like everyone else did. Instead, he said, "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Hart." The rain poured down between them. She stood there, dripping and filthy, holding her empty basket, and this stranger looked at her like she was worth speaking to. "I should go," she said. "You walking far?" 3 miles west." He glanced at the darkening sky. "That's a long walk in this weather." "I've done it before." "I'm sure you have." He paused. "But I've got a wagon. I'd be glad to drive you." Every instinct told her to refuse. She didn't take charity. She didn't trust strangers. But the rain was cold, and the road was long, and something in his face felt safe. "All right," she said. His wagon stood outside the livery stable, hitched to a sturdy gray horse. He helped her up, then climbed beside her and snapped the reins gently. They rode in silence through the storm. She directed him down the rutted road toward her cabin. When it came into view, small, worn, but standing, he pulled the wagon to a stop. "This is it," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Marsh." He looked at the cabin, at the sagging fence, at the patch of garden struggling against weeds. Then he looked at her. "Mrs. Hart," he said carefully, "would you mind if I asked you a question?" Her stomach tightened. Here it comes, she thought. The judgment. The suspicion. "Go ahead." "That mending you dropped," he said. "Was it yours?" "No. I sew for others. For pay." He nodded slowly. "Then you're a seamstress." "I'm a widow trying to survive." "You're a woman with a skill," he corrected gently. That's worth respect. The words landed on her like sunlight through storm clouds. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat again. Good evening, ma'am. She climbed down and watched him drive away through the ring. That night, lying in her empty cabin, she thought about the way he'd knelt in the mud beside her. Not above her, beside her. Caleb Marsh appeared at her cabin 3 days later. Josephine was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the wagon. She straightened, shading her eyes against the morning sun. When she recognized him, her heart did something unexpected. It lifted. He climbed down, holding a wooden crate. Morning, Mrs. Hart, he called. She walked toward him, wiping dirt from her hands. Mr. Marsh, I didn't expect to see you again. I was hoping I could ask a favor. She tensed. Favors usually meant trouble. He set the crate down and opened it. Inside lay fabric, worn shirts, trousers with holes, a coat missing buttons. I'm not much good with a needle, he said. And I heard you do mending. I can pay. She looked at the clothes, then at him. You came all this way for mending? I came because I need help, he said simply. And because I figured you could use the work. Honest. Direct. No pity in his voice. I can do it, she said. Come back in a week. Appreciate it. He tipped his hat, then paused. Your fence there is leaning pretty bad. If you've got tools, I could fix it before I go. I can't pay you for that. Didn't ask you to. She studied him carefully. Why are you being kind to me? He met her eyes. Why wouldn't I be? Because nobody else is. The words came out harder than she meant them to. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then they're fools, he said. He fixed the fence without another word, working steady and sure. Josephine brought him water and watched him work. When he finished, he refused payment again. See you in a week, he said. He came back in a week. And the week after that. Each time, he brought mending. Each time, he found something that needed fixing, a shutter, a loose board, the chicken coop door. You don't have to keep doing this, she said one afternoon. I know. Then why? He looked at her directly. Because I like your company. The words hung in the air between them, honest and plain. She felt something crack open inside her chest. People talk, Mr. Marsh, she said quietly. About me. About my husband. I don't listen to gossip. They say I drove him to drink. That I'm cursed. Caleb set down his hammer. What do you say? She swallowed hard. I say Samuel drank because he chose to. I say I tried to save him and couldn't. I say I've been punished for it ever since. Then you've been punished enough. Tears burned her eyes. She turned away so he wouldn't see. That Sunday, Josephine walked into town for church. She sat in her usual place at the back. When Caleb entered, every head turned. He walked straight to her pew and sat beside her. The whispers started immediately. After the service, Caleb walked her home. Halfway there he spoke. Josephine, he said. Her first name now, not Mrs. Hart. I need to tell you something. She stopped walking. I came to Cutter's Bend looking for a fresh start, he said. I lost my wife 4 years ago. Childbirth. The baby too. Her heart ached for him. I've been alone since then, he continued. Working from town to town. Never staying long. But when I saw you in the mud that day, picking up those coins with your head held high. He paused. I saw strength. I saw dignity. I saw a woman who refused to quit. I'm not special, she whispered. You are to me. The words settled into her like stones into deep water. What are you saying? She asked. I'm saying I'd like to court you properly. If you'll allow it. She looked at him. This steady, kind man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd stopped praying. The town will talk, she said. Let them. They'll say terrible things. I don't care. She took a shaky breath. Then yes. Yes, you may court me. He smiled then, a real smile that lit his whole face. But the happiness didn't last long. The next week, Josephine walked into town to buy flour. The shopkeeper refused to serve her. We don't want your business, Mr. Calloway said coldly. Why not? You know why? That stranger's been spending too much time at your place. Folks are uncomfortable. Heat flooded her face. Mr. Marsh is a decent man. Decent men don't court cursed women. She left without the flour. Outside, she stood in the square fighting tears. Caleb found her there. What happened? She told him. His jaw tightened. They can't do this, he said. They can. They have. For 3 years, Caleb. This is my life. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he took her hand. Not anymore, he said. He led her to the center of the square, where people could see them. Then, in front of the entire town, Caleb Marsh knelt down on one knee in the dirt. Josephine gasped. "Josephine Hart," he said clearly. "Will you marry me?" The square went silent. Every person within sight stopped and stared. Women clutched their shawls. Men stood frozen mid-step. Even the shopkeeper came to his window. Josephine looked down at Caleb kneeling before her in the dirt, holding her work-worn hand in his. Her heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "Caleb, get up," she whispered. "People are watching." "Good," he said loudly. "Let them watch." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. It wasn't fancy, but it caught the sunlight and gleamed. "I don't have much," he continued, "but I've got a strong back, honest work, and a heart that's been empty too long. You've brought light back into my life, Josephine. I want to spend the rest of my days proving your worth more than this whole town sees." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "They'll make your life hard," she said. "They'll try. You could find someone easier. Someone younger. Someone without my past." "I don't want easier," Caleb said firmly. "I want you." The words wrapped around her like a warm coat on a winter night. She looked around the square, saw the shocked faces, the judgment, the whispers starting again. For 3 years, she had lived under the weight of their scorn. For 3 years, she had believed herself unworthy of love. But here was a good man, kneeling in the dirt, asking her to be his wife. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Caleb. I'll marry you." He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he cupped her face gently and kissed her right there in front of everyone. When they pulled apart, the square remained silent. Then someone clapped. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house stepped forward, applauding. She was 70 years old and feared no one. "About time someone saw sense," she announced. "That girl's been suffering long enough." Another person clapped. Then another. Not everyone. Mr. Calloway turned away in disgust. Several others followed. But enough people stayed. Enough hands came together in approval that Josephine felt something shift. Maybe she wasn't cursed after all. They married 2 weeks later in the small church. Mrs. Henderson and the preacher stood witness. Josephine wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself. Caleb wore his cleanest shirt and held her hand like it was made of something precious. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her again, gentle and sure. "Mrs. Marsh," he murmured against her lips. She smiled through happy tears. They moved into her cabin together. Caleb expanded it, adding a second room, fixing the roof, building a proper porch. Josephine continued her sewing, but now she had help with the garden, the chickens, the endless work of survival. More than that, she had partnership. At night, they sat together by the fire. Sometimes Caleb read aloud from books he'd carried with him for years. Sometimes Josephine mended while he whittled. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching. "You ever regret it?" she asked one evening. "Marrying the widow nobody would marry." Caleb set down his knife and looked at her seriously. "Not once," he said. "But I regret that you still call yourself that." "What should I call myself?" "The woman I love," he said simply. "The wife I'm grateful for every morning. The partner who makes hard work feel possible." She leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and soap. "I thought I'd be alone forever," she admitted. "So did I. What changed?" "I saw you in the mud," he said. "And I saw someone who deserved better than what this town gave her. Someone who deserved to be lifted up, not walked past." She lifted her head to look at him. "You changed my life, Caleb." "No," he said quietly. "We changed each other's." By winter, Josephine walked into town with her head high. Some people still whispered. Some still turned away. But others nodded respectfully now. Mrs. Henderson invited them to Sunday supper. The new doctor's wife brought her mending. One afternoon, Mr. Calloway stopped her. Outside the general store. "Mrs. Marsh," he said stiffly. "Mr. Calloway." He cleared his throat. "I may have been hasty. In my judgment, it wasn't quite an apology, but it was something." "Thank you," she said simply and walked on. That evening, she told Caleb what happened. He smiled and pulled her close. "You're not invisible anymore," he said. "I never wanted to be visible like this," she admitted. "But I'm glad I don't have to be invisible to survive anymore either." Spring came again, bringing wildflowers and warmth. One morning, Josephine stood in her garden, now flourishing under Caleb's care, and realized something profound. She was happy, not pretending, not surviving, actually happy. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about the day you knelt in the mud. Best decision I ever made." She turned in his arms. "Why did you really do it? In front of everyone like that?" He considered the question seriously. "Because you spent 3 years being shamed publicly. I figured you deserved to be honored publicly too." The words hit her square in the chest. "I love you," she said. She'd said it before, but each time it felt new. "I love you too." They kissed there in the garden, surrounded by growing things, under a sky that held no judgment anymore. Later that night, lying beside him in the darkness, Josephine thought about the woman she'd been, the widow nobody would marry, the cursed woman, the one people crossed the street to avoid. That woman still existed inside her, but she was joined now by someone stronger, someone loved, someone seen. "Caleb," she whispered. Thank you for seeing me." His hand found hers in the dark and squeezed gently. "Always," he said. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved through new grass. Inside, two people who had been broken by loss and loneliness held each other close. The town would talk for years about the day Caleb Marsh knelt in the mud and asked the widow to marry him. Some told it as a scandal, others as a romance. But Josephine and Caleb knew the truth. It was simply the moment two people decided that the past didn't have to define them, that healing was possible, that love could grow in hard soil, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was kneel down in the dirt and ask someone to build a future with you. And every spring after that, when the wildflowers bloomed, Josephine Hart Marsh stood in her garden and remembered that she was no longer the widow nobody would marry. She was the wife someone cherished, and that made all the difference.